Hello and welcome back to the NUFC Opinion Blog for another Newcastle Legends interview. Today I'm joined by the athletic writer and, well, journalist, I suppose you could say, Chris Waugh. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm very good, thank you, Danny. How are you?
I'm absolutely fine. Thank you for joining me. So, firstly, Chris, just about Newcastle United, how did your passion for supporting the club begin?
Oh, good question. Well, I mean, the sort of boring answer would be that anyone in this sort of area who grows up and is raised in this sort of area will come to support the club. But really, sort of my earliest memories of Newcastle United are watching the odd game on the TV in the living room. The first game I went to wasn't until I was about 10 years old, and I got a ticket to go to Rob Lee's testimonial, which was a game to Athletic
Yes.
Bilbao. It was also the first year I had a season ticket, so I got a season ticket which was very fortunate because when Sir Bobby's team became really good. But so my earliest memories are really around sort of the FA Cup runs in the late 90s, and I remember being very upset after the Arsenal loss in the first one. I remember I didn't really know what was going on, to be honest. I remember watching it at my grandma's, but I don't think I really computed exactly what was going on. I just remember being very sad.
Yeah. My dad was at
that
that
day.
game. My dad was at that game.
Well, unfortunately, I think a lot of Newcastle fans win. I'm sure they had a great day out, but unfortunately, the football itself, as is so often the case, was terrible. But yes, and I remember I had this sort of little statuette type thing of Shearer in my bedroom, and I had the sort of full Newcastle United bedspread, and there's loads of pictures. Actually, my grandma gave me some pictures of when I was young from a few weeks ago, and there's one of me when about 2 years old in a Newcastle United kit with a broken arm. So that sort of sums up my childhood, I suppose, there in terms of clumsy but love Newcastle United.
Well, yeah, it must have been a bit of a bumpy road in your early days if you're breaking your arm at 2 years old. Blooming heck. To be fair, in supporting the club, it could be worse. It could be me. I've never seen Newcastle get to Wembley, except for Tottenham away.
Well, I suppose that's a fair, but yeah, and they still didn't win. They still didn't win even when they played Tottenham away in the league.
No.
So.
Now, a little bit about your career. You gained some journalistic experience at ITV, Tyne Tees, BBC Radio Newcastle, and The Independent, to name a few. How were your times there? And was being a journalist always the plan? Was that always the career path you wanted to go down?
From sort of early teens, it was because when I was young, like anyone, I had sort of delusions of grandeur about my own sort of sporting abilities. And well, I said, did I? Yeah, well, I sort of had the dreams, but I think I always deep down knew that I wasn't actually very good. And actually, the secondary school I went to didn't really have a football team. It was more rugby. So I played a lot of rugby, and I love rugby as well, but I sort of missed out on a few years of football. So, I was never good enough anyway, but even because I hadn't played in sort of between the ages of like 11 and 15 regularly other than five-a-side, it was not something which was ever really going to happen. But I always loved sport. I love watching sport. I love playing sport, just reading about sport. So everything to do with that. And I enjoyed writing in general. And so it was something I always thought that I'd be interested in doing. And then when I went away to university, I initially studied history up at Edinburgh Uni, but I sort of got involved with the student newspapers there and to see if I enjoyed it. And I did really enjoy it. And I thought, well, why don't I go and try and get some work experience if possible because you really need it in this industry if you can, but also to see if I did enjoy it. So yeah, I was very fortunate to get some time at ITV, Tyne Tees, some time BBC Newcastle, Independent in London, Hexham Courant, also at the Chronicle Journal and Sunday Sun offices, which fortunately I eventually went to go and work for. But it was really, really good to experience all of that. And anyone who is interested in journalism, so the one piece of advice I'm always asked for, and it seems a quite mundane one. In some ways, it seems quite inane, but I actually think one of the most important things is just consume as much as possible out there. There is no, you cannot consume too much media because even so now at the minute, obviously I'm only a few years into my journalistic career anyway, but I always think I will be learning. I read different things and I watch different things. I think, well, that's a good idea. It gives you an idea of how to write something slightly differently. Or I think, oh, that didn't quite work. I think I'll avoid that. Or, oh, there's an interesting line to go along that. And the amount of times that I speak to sort of people who say they're interested in journalism, and they go, oh, so what do you read? What do you watch? And so, I don't really read or watch any of it. And I think, well, you've got to have that passion and be consumed by it and want to consume as much as possible. And so, yeah, it was always something which I enjoyed reading, watching, listening to. And so, yeah, it became, once I started doing it, I realized that, yeah, I did enjoy doing it myself as well.
A bit later on in this question and answer. I was actually going to ask you what sort of advice you'd give to aspiring journalists, but you've pretty much done. I'll probably come back to it again at the end. But anyway, further into your career, you spent time at Mail Online and What Culture, the Chronicle as Newcastle United writers. Were they all good times as well?
Yeah, Mail Online was interesting. So when I came back from University at Edinburgh, I did a 17-week fast-track journalism course with the Press Association in the same building as the Chronicle Journal Sunday Sun was, which was just off the Growth Market, just off the big market in the centre of Newcastle.
Yes, I know it,
Unfortunately, not there anymore, but that course was brilliant. I mean, it was the most tired I've ever been in my life, but it was also exhilarating. So it was basically, I was working as almost as a part-time reporter for the Chronicle Journal Sunday Sun while also getting my journalistic qualifications. And while I was there, I was very fortunate to get a position as a trainee, sports trainee with Mail Online. So that involved me initially going to the Manchester Evening News for 3 months. It was meant to be 5 months, but while I was there, after having covered the teams across there, it was the 2014 World Cup. And so Mail Online wanted the trainees there sooner because they knew how much interest there was going to be in that. So I went down to London, lived in the West End of London, lovely area, just about 5-minute walk from Craven Cottage. So it was a tiny place, which was played massively over the odds for, but it was a lovely area to be in because we moved down quite quickly. And so that was an experience. But then I got the opportunity to move back up to Newcastle and to cover the club I'd always sort of wanted to cover. And so that was a fascinating opportunity. And when the chance came with the Chronicle, that was sort of the job I'd always in some ways wanted to covering Newcastle United day to day, home and away, opportunity to do that. And so I worked for the Chronicle Journal Sunday Sun and Chronicle Live for, I think I was there for nearly 4 years. And it wasn't something I was necessarily looking to leave. I really enjoyed it. Covering the club can be exhausting, just as following as it can be, and there aren't many happy times. But when the happy times come along, you do appreciate them more and more. But it was and to cover the club day to day during. My first season was when Newcastle United got relegated under Steve McLaren, so probably not happy in that sense. But then I got to cover the team for 3.5 years when Rafa Benitez was manager, so that was a very special experience. Yeah.
You then, of course, left The Athletic, as you mentioned. So what's it like working for this? Because obviously it's a bit of a newer sort of organisation, not as well established. Well, it is now, I'd say, but at the time maybe it wasn't. So what's it like working for them?
It's very different, but in a great sort of way. I mean, I loved the previous role I was in. As I say, I wasn't necessarily looking to leave. It all came as a bit of a surprise when it happened. I remember vividly sort of the conversation that I first had with I mean, I'm very close with George Colkin now, and I knew him pretty well, but I wouldn't say we were close friends or anything like that. We were colleagues, and when we saw each other from time to time outside of work. But I had a text from him while I was working at the Chronicle Journal, basically saying, "Can you give me a ring?" And I thought there was a problem because it seemed sort of quite important. So I went to an office at the side of the Chronicle Journal building, gave him a call, and he said he was leaving the Times. And I thought what he was initially going to say was, "So I think you should apply for a job as a Northeast reporter at the Times." And then he said, and I want you to come with me. And I had once heard of The Athletic. I'd read one piece that they'd done about an Italian football club a few years before, but I didn't know that much about. So then, sort of in a whirlwind, couple of months, got offered the opportunity to cover Newcastle United full time. And for the industry, it was huge at the time because, and it remains huge because it's been a contracting industry for so long, certainly in sports journalism, jobs that haven't been coming around. And this was a company who were willing to invest and to create job opportunities and to cover Newcastle United full time outside of being a local newspaper. And so it was a leap of faith in many ways because subscription models are far more established in the US than they have been in the UK. But I believed in it. I believe in quality journalism. I have done for a long while, and I felt that there was a market for it. And thankfully, so far that seems to have been the case. We seem to have been well received. We're ahead of where I think a lot of us expected to be in terms of that. And it is very different content. I mean, whereas at the Chronicle Journal Sunday Sun, I could be writing between sort of 4 and 8 articles a day. On average, I do sort of 3 a week for The Athletic, but they're sort of more in depth. They take a lot more time, and we're encouraged to really delve deep into things, be that statistically or be that speak to as many people as possible. And there isn't the sort of drive for advertising revenue and clicks in that sense, because we're all about subscriptions and retaining those subscriptions in that sense. And so it's a different approach to journalism. Nobody yet has really found a way that pays online, and hopefully this so far seems to have been successful, and hopefully long may that continue.
Yeah. Moving now to on-field matters. obviously we all know exactly how this. I think you probably knew this was coming at some point, but Newcastle's season hasn't been the best. I think that's one way of putting it. So if you had to summarise it or sum it up, what has been a pretty awful season so far, how would you do so?
I would say that it feels like a sort of cliff edge season where Newcastle started, and they were always teetering on the brink in terms of points wise. You look at the first quarter of the season, and they returned a lot of points, and you had a lot of sort of external commentators or pundits speaking about, well, why Newcastle fans complaining. They're ninth in the table or whatever. They've got 17 points from 11 games or whatever. But the points always seem to belie the actual performances. And really, eventually that's caught up with them. And injuries and COVID did play a real impact. And that's when the downturn happened. But I think that as a lot of Newcastle fans who watch them every week will say, the metrics, Newcastle sort of defied the metrics a lot of last season, and a lot of the performances probably they got more points than they deserved from them, and it really has caught up with them, and it's been a real disaster, certainly 2021 so far, and they have actually fallen off that cliff edge. They haven't quite got into the bottom three yet, and that's more because I'd say of other teams' failings than necessarily Newcastle United's own ability to keep themselves above water, because they've only won 2 of the last 21 games in all competitions, 2 in the last 19 in the league. And so, yeah, it has not been fun, and it hasn't been fun to cover it over the last few months either. Just like it hasn't been fun watching it, hasn't been fun to cover.
No, it's been pretty awful watching it, I think, is the best way of putting it. If you had to predict, do you see us staying up or going down?
If I got asked this question a fortnight ago, and at that point I said I thought Newcastle would probably go. Now I think that Newcastle might just survive, and again I think that's because going to be the failings of others. I think Fulham, it's been a big shift in the last 2 games. I think psychologically it's had an impact on Fulham because they haven't won either of the last 2 games they would have targeted. Now Fulham play before Newcastle this weekend, and that could change entirely, because if they win and knock Newcastle in the relegation zone, then psychologically things could shift. But I think that for Fulham, those were 2 games that they were targeting certainly to get at least a few points from, and they managed to get none from them. So in that sense, I think Newcastle might just sneak to survival, but it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be comfortable. And even if they do just sneak to survival, it's still been an absolutely awful season.
Yeah, very much so. Now, what would you say were your best moments, first as a fan watching Newcastle, and then as a reporter covering them?
Best moments as a fan. I mean, I mentioned that I got a season ticket in the 2001, 2002 season. And those last seasons of Sir Bobby were absolutely brilliant, watching that side, watching the Champions League team, some of the nights, seeing the Juventus goal, seeing from Andy Griffin, being there for the 4-3 win over Manchester United. I mean, that team was very special, and I think that people outside of the Northeast don't sort of remember that team as fondly in many ways as Kevin Keegan's side. And I can understand why, because they didn't really get quite as close to winning the league, but they were a fantastic side. And I mean, they were top of the league at Christmas in one of those seasons, as they were competing for the title as well as for getting the latter stages of the Champions League. I just thought that they were an absolutely phenomenal team to watch. And that's sort of I was a bit too young to really remember the entertainers at their very best. I sort of have come to live it afterwards. And obviously I know the teams very well and the players very well from that period, having looked back at it, but I didn't live it at the time, whereas I have those vivid memories of sort of sitting in the Gallagher end, front left corner, and watching that rapid counter-attack inside, the likes of Bellamy and Dyer and Solano and Robert powering forward, getting flick-ons from Shearer, and what a wonderful side. And unfortunately, we haven't seen too many sides similar since. But in terms of covering the club, I'd say the promotion season under Rafa Benitez obviously was up there in terms of there hasn't been much success, and whether you can call that success in many ways, it was given the context of where the club was and what they'd been through. But in terms of success and the wider history of things, you wouldn't necessarily say as that. But it was a wonderful season where everything seemed, certainly for the first sort of 7-8 months of the season, everyone was heading in the right sort of direction. It felt like there was positivity in the club again. It felt like there was some sort of direction that there hadn't been throughout the rest of the Mike Ashley era, and there hasn't been subsequently either. But there was, for a few months, it felt like maybe this can actually work, that maybe there can be a direction forward. And working with Benitez day to day was fascinating. I mean, he's a very intense character, and subsequently having worked with him when he was a columnist at The Athletic, it can be a very, very tiring experience dealing with him, because it's brilliant, but you can never quite switch off when you're speaking to him, and so it can be exhausting, but in a brilliant sort of way. And it's every time you speak to him, it's a lesson. But the way that he sort of controlled the club, the way that he got everyone on side, got everyone pointing in the same direction, was quite phenomenal. And so that season, they played some very, very good football as well that season. I mean, 6-0 away at QPR, some games at home, the 4-3 against Norwich. What a brilliant game that was. So yeah, that would probably be in terms of
showing them the winning goal from it there.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. That was, I mean, that was, in terms of journalistically, that was one of the most stressful nights of my life, because it was,
I could imagine. Yeah.
Because they had to change, basically had to throw out everything that they had written, and that was even just when the equaliser went in. But then when the winner went in, it was a complete con. It was brilliant, and it was absolute. And I don't think I've had an adrenaline rush quite like it. But it was quite stressful as well, because my deadline was very, very tight for that night as well. So.
Oh dear. Now, you mentioned when you were speaking about moments as a fan, a few players there. I don't know, are there any players in particular you idolised growing up?
I mean, obviously, Shearer would be the obvious answer, who didn't as Newcastle fan, but the player I always loved, and I do not think got enough recognition outside of Newcastle, was Nolbert Solano. I just thought it was an absolutely wonderful footballer, and I don't think he gets spoken about enough by fans of other clubs. I don't think they realised quite how good he was. Technically, he was brilliant. He was a very clever footballer. Some of the goals that he scored, some of the crosses he supplied, some of the passes he played, I just absolutely loved watching Nolbert Solano. And he's also, I'm pleased to say, an absolutely brilliant bloke. Since I've dealt with him journalistically as well, I can say he's a lovely bloke. So when they say don't meet your heroes, I can tell you that Nolbert Solano certainly delivers. And he can obviously play the trumpet. Although he was telling me,
play the trumpet, yeah.
He told me a few months ago he hasn't been playing much recently, which was a bit sad.
That spoils the legend of it. Oh. Looking ahead to the future now, it's quite a sort of an open and big question, this, but I asked this to a lot of people. What would you like the future of Newcastle United to look like?
Well, that is quite an open question. I mean, I'd like it to look like a different owner entirely. I mean, obviously, I think that's the sort of prime example. But I would like it to just have more humanity about it. There's no. It feels like such a soulless club, the way that it is at the moment. It feels like the best thing about any football club, but particularly Newcastle United, are the fans. And I mean that they define this football club. Other clubs, they're obviously integral, but you can talk about, if you talk about Liverpool or Manchester United, you talk about trophies as well. You talk about Champions League runs. Newcastle United certainly in recent years don't have that. They have supporters. They've got world-class supporters, and that bond has been frayed, and it's now at the point where it's almost broken with a lot of fans. Well, a lot of fans, it has been broken, and they stopped going. And I do worry about post-pandemic how many fans will want to come back now that there's been that opportunity. Some who went because it was what they always did. Will they return now that they've had a year of having not gone and maybe not felt as much of a disconnect from it as they thought that they might? Having realised that I don't really want to pay several £100s to go and watch that team at the moment, that they don't want to go back when the current head coach is in charge, but primarily because the current owner is in charge. And so I just think that for me is more important than anything. Ambition obviously is what we all want to see, and we'd like to see a club trying to better itself. But more than anything, I just think a club which has far more respect and connection with its supporters, and I feel at the moment that there isn't that. I mean, for a start, there's the managing director came out when Steve Bruce was appointed, and in his first programme notes said that we would hear from him regularly. And here we are now, 2 years later. There's been a global pandemic. Football's been shut down. Fans have been locked out of the stadium, and we just haven't heard from him. Supporters haven't heard from him, and I think that there needs to be more of that. And I think it's such an easy and simple thing, and it shouldn't be like that. But that for me is more important than anything else. Is just to really build that connection again with supporters.
Would you say then that the communication from club to fan base is something that really needs improving?
Oh, the communication, definitely, yeah. And it's all part of it. But it goes beyond communication. It's also just sort of like making it feel like the phrase which sort of really breaks my heart every time I hear supporters say it, or when we get it in messages on the bottom of articles on The Athletic, or when we do sort of Q&As and things, when people say it doesn't feel like my club anymore. And it's just like, well, it always has been your club, and it should be your club, and it is every Newcastle supporters club. And to feel that disconnected from it, and that is a large part to do with communication, because you don't hear it from the top, you don't hear from the owner unless he wants to kick the Premier League because he's annoyed because they haven't passed his takeover, which he's so desperate to get through, but yeah, he won't take a reduced price. But I suppose that's a completely different direction you'd have to head down to discuss that. But yeah, it is all those little things. It's about explaining. They miss so many opportunities. It's like the whole issue with furlough over the course of the last year at Newcastle United. I mean, I disagree with it, and I think I probably would have disagreed with it regardless. But come out and explain why you feel it. Explain that the reason that we've taken people on the furlough scheme for this reason or that. And as I say, a lot of people will probably still disagree with it, but at least you hear from them. Whereas instead, there's been no public admittance that they have taken government money for furlough, and that it's just things like that which just really just seem so easy to correct and that need to change, because as I keep saying, that the football club is about supporters. You remove the supporters from it and there isn't a football club there. It's all about community, and we've seen that more than ever during the pandemic for all football clubs, but particularly in Newcastle, where it's a special part of the sea. The status that the club has, and the meaning that it has to supporters, or historically has had to supporters, and to be able to have worn that down to the extent that they have is quite an achievement. And I mean that in a very, very negative sense.
You mentioned the takeover there. Obviously, it's the most draining sort of thing we've had in some time at the club in terms of fan base and probably journalists covering it as well, because, it seems like every day there's some little new twist or tale in it. Obviously, we're in the midst of the arbitration case at the moment. Do you have any thoughts on it all? Do you think it'll ever happen, or do you think it's time to move on?
I don't think it's necessarily time to move on in terms of that specific deal. I think it's time to move on in terms of that the owner of the club needs to realise that even if he is pursuing that deal for now, he remains the owner of the club, and it's been drifting along for far too long. You could argue it's been drifting along for basically his whole time as owner, but particularly, at least previously, there was a direction that he was heading in. I and a lot of people didn't necessarily agree with it, but there was a blueprint. There was a way he tried to run it. It was to be self-sustainable in many ways, and to bring through young players to then hopefully progress and then move on. But that basically model seems to have been almost abandoned. I wrote last summer that some people in and around the club felt it had become a ghost ship club, and I have no evidence to suggest that that's changed. If anything, it seems to have moved on even more than that. There's this desire, this sort of willing for this takeover, which we don't know whether it will happen or not. It may happen, it may not. But in the meantime, Mike Ashley remains owner, and the club is sort of teetering, and it's teetering on the brink of relegation. If your only ambition is to finish 17th, then eventually you're going to fall short of that, as they have done twice during the Mike Ashley era, and you're going to potentially get relegation. But the deal is still there. It's going through arbitration at the moment. Both sides seem confident they're going to win. So the Premier League think they're going to win. The prospective buyers and Mike Ashley, and it's going through Mike Ashley because it has to be through Newcastle United, think they're going to win. And I honestly couldn't answer which way it is going to go. At the moment, it is still at the same impasse it was at last June. If anything, Newcastle themselves have sort of delayed the process by having taken the judge to High Court to try and get him removed from being the arbitration case. So that kicked it on 4 months. So it's partly their own fault that it has taken this long. But Newcastle needs new ownership. It desperately needs new ownership, and there's a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily like to see the prospective owners take charge, and I entirely understand that. But I do think it's now at a point where it needs fresh ownership. It needs a change of direction, and I hope that a change of direction, be it that with these prospective owners or someone else, comes at some point, because the relationship with Mike Ashley and supporters was broken long ago. He has no ambition to own the club anymore. And I would just like to see him, if he is so keen to sell it, as he keeps telling us all, if this deal doesn't happen, if it can't get past the Premier League, then reduce the price, because at the moment he's only keen to sell the club if his asking price is met.
Yeah. Now, to sum things up, we touched on it a little bit earlier about terms of aspirations and sort of in journalistic roles. If you had to give any other advice, I know you mentioned some at the start, if you had to give any other advice for aspiring journalists who may want to follow sort of in your footsteps, or even another role in the media, what would you say?
I mean, yeah, obviously I give that sort of advice before about consuming as much as possible, but I think that, I mean, things like this, doing things like this that you are in terms of doing podcasts or doing articles for True Faith or other fanzines or writing blogs and experimenting in various different ways. That the way that the media industry has changed, and so it's basically been since I've come into it, but it's been ever evolving ever since. Is that it's no longer, whereas 20 years ago, if you were the local reporter covering Newcastle United, or if you're the local news reporter, you wouldn't have to be a multimedia journalist as you are now. You would basically just write copy. Whereas now, I mean, people do podcasts, they do videos, you're expected to do live blogs, you're expected to tweet, use social media, you have to write articles as well. You have to write different sort of articles, and you have to be open to always trying to expand your own sort of skill set. I mean, even for example, in recent weeks, George Colkin has had something on Twitter called Twitter. I think it's called Moments. Is it Moments?
Spaces.
Sorry, Space. That's what it's called.
I've been on a couple of them. I've listened to a few of them.
So well. Thank you. I'm glad I joined in. But I had no idea what just one day just text, because I think it's only for certain users at the moment. He just texted me and said, "Oh, do you want to do a Spaces this afternoon?" I had no idea what he was talking about. But again, I mean, it's sort of the similar as to speaking on radio or to doing a podcast, but it's not exactly the same. It's another sort of skill as to get out there, and the industry continues to change, and so I think someone who may have an ambition to get into the industry may think, I want to work on radio, or I want to work on TV, or I want to be a written journalist, or I want to do whatever. And I think that you just have to have the flexibility and the ability to do all the different roles, because they are in some ways merging so that we all do a bit of everything, but also it gives you more opportunities in this industry. And if you become so pigeonholed that you're determined to do one specific thing, then I think you cut off your own horizons, and you limit the sort of success that you can have. And one thing that we have to use professionally, and I can understand why people have so much trepidation towards it, is social media. And it can be a very difficult environment to be in it. I mean, it doesn't affect me too much, because I've got a personality where I'm quite happy to just ignore things, but equally I know that isn't the vast majority of people, and I'm not being flippant about that. I think there's some very serious stuff on social media, and it can even sometimes get to me at some point. And unfortunately, whereas maybe 15, 20 years ago in a local journalistic role, you wouldn't be that well known, you wouldn't have that sort of situation to have to deal with. Now that almost comes with the territory, and you've got to almost get yourself in a position to be able to deal with that and to be able to interact with people. And unfortunately, there is some negativity out there, but there are also brilliance of social media. That's part of why I love The Athletic so much, is that I love that interaction that we have on the app and with people, the people comment on the bottom of articles. We're encouraged to speak to them. We do sort of Q&As, and we have people contributing, and that's what journalism, in my opinion, should be. Well, certainly my position as someone covering Newcastle United, I should be approachable, because I am not. There's nothing special about me. I just happen to cover the football club. The fans are the important ones. What do the fans want to know? What do the fans need to know about? What are their questions, answers? And having that sort of approachability and understand as to what you can give back to people is sort of important as well. So I realized that was a lot of mishmash of sort of different things I've just said there, so I apologize. But hopefully there was a little something in there.
I certainly, I took a lot from that as well. And if anyone else is watching who, has similar sort of aspirations, I'm sure they would have done the same. George, as I say, George Colkin, you mentioned there, another writer for The Athletic as well, and great, and hopefully might get him on at some point soon as well. But Chris, thank you very much for joining me today.
You're welcome, anytime.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. That sums things up. So thank you all very much for watching, and how are the lads?